The night was cold, and the wind carried dust through the broken street. John sat alone inside his small shelter, a dim fire glowing in the corner. He had learned to live with silence, to stay unnoticed in a city watched by patrols. His eyes stayed on the cracked window, always alert for soldiers who hunted anyone who broke the council's laws. Then, suddenly, there was a knock on his door, soft, weak, like someone afraid of being heard. He froze, hand tightening on the old rifle beside him. Few dared to knock at night. He stepped closer, silent, and listened. Another knock came, followed by a trembling voice. "Please, just the leftovers for my starving child." The words didn't sound like a trap. They sounded desperate, breaking apart between sobs. John opened the door slowly, rifle ready. A figure stood in the shadows, an alien woman wrapped in torn fabric, her shoulders shaking. Behind her legs, half hidden, was a small child with pale skin, eyes wide with fear. Her face was tired, dirt marking her cheeks, lips dry from thirst. She lowered her head and whispered again, "Please, anything you can spare. He has not eaten for 3 days." John's first thought was danger. Helping her meant trouble. The patrols would not forgive kindness. If they discovered he gave food to an alien fugitive, they would burn his shelter and drag him into the street. His second thought, however, was the child. Small, thin, barely able to stand. The boy's hands clutched his mother's torn clothes as though letting go in death. John's chest tightened. He had seen hungry children before, even among his own people during the war. That memory haunted him now. The mother's voice shook again, softer this time. "You can even throw it on the ground. I won't step inside. Just let him eat." The wind howled past them, carrying the sound of marching boots from far away. Patrols were moving through the streets, their searchlights sweeping over the ruins. Time was running out. John looked at the rifle in his hand, then back at the woman and her son. "Get inside," he muttered sharply. The woman gasped as if struck. She pulled her child closer. "No, please, I don't want trouble for you. I said get inside," John repeated, his voice firm, though his eyes betrayed a different kind of struggle. Slowly, she stepped over the threshold, her child stumbling beside her. The moment she entered, John shut the door quickly and barred it. He guided them toward the dim fire. The warmth lit up their faces, and for the first time he saw the child clearly. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes too large for his face. The boy swayed, then dropped weakly to the floor. The mother dropped to her knees, trying to comfort him, her own tears falling silently. "Hold on, my son," she whispered in her own tongue before looking at John. Please, help him." John walked to a small corner where scraps of bread and dried roots lay on a plate. They were his own rations, barely enough for the week. His hand hovered over them. If he gave them away, he would starve sooner. But when he turned and saw the boy's trembling fingers reaching toward the plate, his decision came quickly. He carried the food to the child and knelt. "Eat," he said simply. The child's eyes filled with both fear and hope. He looked at his mother, who nodded quickly. With shaking hands, the boy took the bread and bit into it, as if afraid it would vanish. His small body trembled with each bite. John could almost hear the boy's heartbeat racing with the taste of food after so long. The woman bowed her head until it touched the floor. "You have saved us," she whispered. Her voice broke into sobs, quiet but heavy with pain. John felt a strange weight in his chest. He was no hero, only a survivor. Yet in that moment, he saw himself reflected in their suffering. Years ago, after a raid, he too had begged for food, only to be refused. That wound never healed. The sound of boots grew closer outside, breaking the silence. Harsh voices shouted commands in the street. Searchlights brushed against the walls. The woman's body stiffened, her hands covering her child's mouth to stop him from coughing. Fear filled her eyes as she looked at John, silently pleading for protection. John's grip tightened on his rifle. He glanced toward the hidden hatch in the floor, a space he had built years ago to hide supplies. His heart pounded as he realized he might have to use it. If the patrols entered now, they would all die. The child whimpered, muffled under his mother's palm. John stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Quiet, both of you. Not a sound." The woman nodded, tears running down her cheeks as she hugged her son tightly. Outside, the boots stopped right at his door. A fist slammed against the wood. "Open up!" a soldier barked. John's blood turned cold. He glanced at the woman one last time. Her lips trembled, her whole body shaking. He knew then that his choice was already made. He would not give them up. Not tonight. He set his rifle against the wall and unbarred the door slowly, masking the storm inside his chest with a calm face. The moment the door opened, a beam of red light swept across the room. Soldiers stood there, scanning him with sharp eyes. "What's inside?" the leader demanded. John looked straight at them, steady as stone. "Nothing but me." The woman and her child stayed hidden in the shadows behind the fire, holding their breath, waiting to see if the human's lie would save them or end them all. The soldier's red light swept across the room, pausing on the small fire, on the cracked walls, on the old rifle leaning by the door. John stood tall, his face calm, though his heartbeat thudded like drums inside his chest. The patrol leader's eyes narrowed. "We heard voices," he said, his tone sharp and suspicious. John didn't flinch. "I talk to myself sometimes," he answered. His voice carried no fear, only the weight of a man who had lived too long with silence. The soldier tilted his head, not convinced. He stepped inside, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Another soldier followed, scanning the corners, kicking aside a broken chair. John kept his hands loose at his sides, ready to grab his rifle if needed. Behind the fire, hidden in the shadows, the alien mother crouched low, holding her child against her chest. She pressed her palm over his mouth, praying he wouldn't cough again. The boy's small body trembled, his wide eyes staring at the soldiers only a few steps away. One of the patrolmen stopped near the fire. He bent down, frowning. "This is fresh," he said. "Someone else has been here." John's jaw tightened. "It's my food. Who else would it be?" The leader's eyes scanned him up and down. Humans don't cook much these days, not without reason. He stepped closer, so close John could see the scar that cut across the alien's face. "You hiding something, human?" John leaned forward slightly, letting the firelight harden his features. "Only my patience," he said coldly. "You want to search my shelter, do it. But if you're wasting my time, I'll remember your face." For a moment, silence hung heavy. The soldiers exchanged looks. Humans were dangerous when cornered, everyone knew that. And though John's home looked poor, his eyes burned with the kind of fire that promised trouble if pushed too far. Finally, the leader grunted. "Search quickly," he ordered. The soldiers spread out, kicking through piles of scrap metal, pulling aside blankets, opening crates. Each sound made the alien mother hold her breath tighter. The boy's chest heaved, his small lungs fighting against her hand. She whispered softly in his ear in her own language, begging him not to make a sound. Then it happened. The boy coughed, a small sound, but sharp in the silence. John's blood froze. The soldier nearest the fire turned sharply. "What was that?" He barked, stepping toward the shadows. John moved instantly. He kicked a metal pot across the floor. The loud clang filled the room. "That," he said, glaring at the soldier. "A rat. Plenty of them around." The soldier paused, annoyed. "Filthy place," he muttered, and kicked the pot again for good measure. The leader seemed impatient now. "Enough. He's not worth it. Let's move." The soldiers left as quickly as they came, boots stomping into the night. John shut the door slowly, then leaned against it, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground until the sound of boots faded away. Only then did the alien mother move from the shadows. She clutched her child tightly, tears shining in her eyes. "You risked everything," she whispered. Her voice was soft, filled with disbelief. "Why?" John looked at her for a long moment. "Because I've seen children die before," he said quietly. "And I won't watch it happen again." The boy raised his weak hand, offering the last bite of bread to John as if to thank him. John pushed it back gently. "Keep it," he said. The woman lowered her head, her lips trembling. "I thought humans had no mercy." John gave a bitter smile. "Most don't. I'm not most." The boy leaned against his mother's chest, his breathing calmer now. She stroked his hair, whispering soft words in her language, words of comfort. John sat by the fire, watching them. For years, he had lived alone, believing there was no place for compassion in a world ruled by soldiers and fear. Yet here, in this small broken shelter, something stirred in him he hadn't felt in a long time. The silence was broken again, but this time by John's own words. "What's your name?" The woman hesitated, then answered, "Lyra." She touched the boy's shoulder. "And he is Kale." John nodded. The names were strange on his tongue, but he repeated them softly, as if making a promise. "Lyra. Kale." Outside, the city burned with cold lights and iron patrols. Inside, around a small fire, 3 lives sat together, bound by danger and hunger. None of them knew how long they could stay hidden. But in that moment, John knew one thing clearly. He would protect them, even if it meant his own death. The boy drifted into sleep, his face calmer now, his thin chest rising and falling steadily. Lyra adjusted the cloth around him and looked at John again. Her eyes were full of questions she dared not ask. Questions about humans, about trust, about survival. John stared back at her, his expression hard but not unkind. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be worse." Lyra nodded, though fear still lingered in her eyes. She leaned against the wall, rocking Cale gently. For the first time in many nights, she allowed herself to close her eyes, knowing someone else was standing guard. John picked up his rifle and sat by the door, listening to the distant echoes of soldiers in the streets. He tightened his grip, his thoughts heavy. He had broken the line tonight. There was no going back. In the silence, he thought he heard Cale whisper again, half asleep. One word. Faint, faint but clear. "Papa?" The sound struck John's heart like an arrow. He closed his eyes for a moment, then looked at the fire, whispering to himself. What have I done? But deep inside, he already knew. He had chosen. And that choice would change everything. The night stretched on, and John did not sleep. His eyes stayed fixed on the door. Rifle across his lap, ears sharp for every sound outside. Patrols moved less now, but their presence never faded. Once or twice, heavy boots echoed through the street, making the wooden walls shake. Each time, John's finger tightened on the trigger, ready to fight if needed. Behind him, Lyra and Cale slept in the corner near the fire. The boy's breathing was shallow but steady now. The soft rise and fall of his chest, a small sign of life. Lyra clutched him tightly, even in sleep, as if letting go meant losing him forever. John's gaze kept drifting toward them. He told himself it was only caution, only to make sure they did not try anything foolish. But deep down, something heavier stirred, something he had buried for years. At dawn, the fire had burned low. John stood, stretching his stiff body. He pulled out a small piece of dried meat from his pack and chewed it slowly. Hunger gnawed at him, but he didn't complain. Instead, he glanced at the child again. Cale was awake now, his large eyes staring at John with curiosity, half hidden behind his mother's arms. John sighed and tossed a small piece of meat toward him. The boy grabbed it quickly, holding it as if it were treasure. Lyra's eyes widened in shock. "No," she whispered, pushing the meat back. "You need it more. You cannot waste your food on us." John shook his head. "If the boy starves, I'll hear his cries. I'd rather eat silence." Lyra stared at him, speechless, before lowering her gaze. She pressed the food back into Cale's hands, whispering something soft in her language. The boy nibbled carefully, as though afraid it would vanish too fast. Suddenly, the sound of a horn split the morning air. John stiffened. He moved quickly to the window and peered through a crack. Down the street, 3 armored transports rolled past, their engines growling like beasts. Behind them marched soldiers, banners raised high. At the center of the formation, a prisoner cart dragged along. Inside, through the iron bars, John saw 2 alien women chained together. Their faces were bruised, their heads hung low. Lyra gasped when she saw them. Her hand covered her mouth, her body shaking. John turned sharply. "You know them?" Her eyes filled with tears. "They are from my clan. The soldiers must have found them. They will not live long." John's jaw tightened. He knew what happened to prisoners. The council had no mercy. They would either be sold or executed publicly as a warning. His gut twisted with anger, but he forced himself to stay calm. The convoy stopped right in front of his street. Soldiers spread out, searching doors, pulling people outside, demanding information. John cursed under his breath. He turned to Lyra. "Hide, now!" She grabbed Cale and ran to the hatch in the floor John had shown her earlier. He pulled the wooden cover back, and she climbed inside with her child. Her eyes locked on his. "What about you?" "I'll keep them busy," he said, lowering the cover before she could argue. Moments later, heavy knocks slammed against his door. John took a slow breath, steadying his heart. Then he unbarred the door and opened it. A soldier pushed past him instantly, scanning the room. Another followed, spear in hand. The leader stood at the doorway, his sharp eyes fixed on John. "We are looking for fugitives," the leader said. "They were seen in this district. Did you hear or see anything unusual?" John kept his face hard. I hear soldiers marching every night. That's unusual enough. The soldier's eyes narrowed. Answer carefully. If you are hiding them, it will cost you your life. John crossed his arms. Search if you want. You won't find anything. The soldiers moved quickly, tossing aside crates, lifting blankets, stomping across the floor. John stood still, hiding the storm boiling inside him. Every step the soldiers took closer to the hatch felt like fire crawling up his spine. One soldier kicked the hatchboard. What's this? He barked. John moved fast. Storage, he said sharply, stepping forward. Old junk. Open it and you'll find rusted tools not worth a soldier's time. The soldier smirked and lifted his spear, ready to pry it open. John's hand shot out, gripping the spear firmly. Their eyes met, tension crackling between them. John's voice was low, deadly calm. I said it's junk. You think I'm hiding treasures under my own floor? Go ahead, dig, but if you waste my time, I'll remember your face, and so will every human in this street. The soldier hesitated. Humans had a reputation, even broken ones. They didn't forgive easily, and they remembered debts in blood. The leader watched silently, then finally waved his hand. Enough. Move on. We have no time to waste. The soldiers pulled back, grumbling, and marched out the door. The convoy rolled forward again, prisoners still chained inside. John waited until the sound faded before locking the door once more. He pulled the hatch open. Lyra crawled out, clutching Cale. Her face was pale, sweat dripping down her forehead. The boy clung to her, whispering softly. You saved us again, she said, her voice trembling. John said nothing. He dropped into a chair, rubbing his face with both hands. His heart was still pounding. He had lied, threatened, risked everything. Twice now. Each time, the noose around his neck tightened. Cale crawled toward him, small hands pulling at his sleeve. Papa, the boy whispered again, his voice weak but trusting. John looked at him, then at Lyra. She was staring too, her eyes full of confusion and fear, and something else he could not name. He leaned back, rifle across his lap once more. If the soldiers find out, we're all dead, he muttered. His eyes burned with quiet fire. But if they come again, I'll kill every one of them before I let them touch you. The weight of his words filled the small shelter. Outside, the city still burned with patrols and cruelty. Inside, a promise had been made, a dangerous, irreversible promise. The night after the convoy passed, silence filled John's shelter. Lyra sat near the fire with Cale asleep in her lap, her fingers stroking his hair slowly. The boy's chest rose and fell, weak but steady. She hummed a broken lullaby in her own tongue, soft enough to sound like a whisper of wind. John listened while he cleaned his rifle, the sound pulling at something deep inside him. He tried to ignore it, but every note made him remember a time long ago when his own mother had sung to him during the war. That memory cut like a blade. When Lyra noticed him watching, her voice broke off, her cheeks flushing with shame. I'm sorry, she whispered. It is an old song. It must annoy you. John shook his head. It doesn't. His voice was rough, but honest. He returned to cleaning the rifle, though his mind was no longer on the weapon. After a long silence, Lyra spoke again, her tone hesitant. I want you to know, I never trusted humans. My people always said your kind had no heart, only hunger for power. I believed them, until you. John's hands paused for a moment, his eyes narrowed at the fire. Don't mistake me for a good man, he said quietly. I've done things I can't wash away. Helping you won't change that. Lyra lowered her head. Maybe, but right now, you are the only reason my son still breathes. Cale stirred in her arms, his small fingers clutching at her torn clothes. John looked at the boy again, remembering the word he had whispered twice before. Papa. The word still echoed in his mind. He wondered if the child truly believed it, or if it was only a dream brought on by hunger. Either way, it unsettled him more than enemy soldiers. The next day came cold and gray. John went out before dawn, slipping through narrow alleys to search for food. He avoided patrols, keeping his hood low. The city smelled of smoke and fear, markets stripped bare, families huddling in doorways. He passed a cage where alien prisoners sat chained, their eyes empty of hope. He clenched his fists, anger burning in his chest. He wanted to help them, but he knew one mistake would doom Lyra and Cale as well. Near the edge of the market, John saw a vendor throwing away spoiled fruit. He waited until the man turned his back, then grabbed what he could from the pile. The fruit was half rotten, but it was better than nothing. As he turned to leave, 2 guards stepped into his path. "What's that in your hand, human?" one asked, voice full of mockery. "Trash," John said flatly. The guard smirked. "Trash belongs to the council, too." He reached for the bag, but John pulled back. The other guard shoved him hard against a wall. For a moment, John thought of drawing his knife and cutting them down, but he forced himself to stay calm. Blood here would bring more soldiers. Finally, the first guard snorted and waved him off. "Filthy human, keep your trash." They laughed as they walked away. John's knuckles were white as he carried the bag back to his shelter. Inside, Lyra's eyes lit up when she saw the fruit. She took it with trembling hands, cutting away the spoiled parts before feeding the small pieces to Kale. The boy chewed slowly, his face softening with relief. When Kale finished, Lyra looked at John with wet eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. I have nothing to give." John leaned against the wall, his voice low. "Keep the boy alive. That's thanks enough." She stared at him for a long moment before whispering, "You could have stayed safe. You could have shut the door on us. But you didn't. Why?" John didn't answer right away. He looked at Kale, then at the fire. Finally, he said, "Because once I was the boy." Lyra tilted her head, confusion in her eyes. John rarely spoke of himself, but the words spilled like stones now. "After the raids, when I was young, I went hungry for weeks. I begged, just like you did. Most people turned away. Some even beat me. I swore that if I ever had the power, I wouldn't let a child starve in front of me again." Silence followed his words. Lyra touched her son's cheek gently, her throat tightening. She whispered, "Then fate brought us to the right door." Before John could reply, a loud crash echoed outside. He grabbed his rifle instantly and motioned for silence. Boots thundered in the street, louder than before. Shouts carried through the air. Lyra pulled Kale close, her eyes wide with terror. "They're searching again," she whispered. John peeked through the window. Dozens of soldiers moved from house to house, dragging out anyone they suspected of harboring fugitives. A neighbor across the street screamed as he was beaten to the ground. Blood spilled into the dirt. John's jaw tightened. "They're closing in." He turned to Lyra. "If they find you here, it's over. We need a plan." Her voice shook. "Run? Where? They control everything." John checked the rifle, sliding a fresh magazine into place. "Then we make them believe you're not here. And if that fails," his eyes burned like steel, "then I'll give them something else to fear." Lyra stared at him, her lips trembling. She had never seen such fire in a human's eyes. In that moment, she realized he was not only protecting them, he was preparing to fight a battle he might not survive. The boy stirred again, whispering sleepily, "Papa." John looked down at him, and his resolve hardened. He stood tall, rifle ready, and moved to the door. The storm outside was coming for them, but John had already chosen his side. The pounding on the neighbor's door grew louder, followed by screams and the heavy crack of weapons. John's grip tightened on his rifle as he listened. He knew the soldiers would not stop until every home was searched. His own door would be next. The fire inside the shelter burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. In the corner, Lyra clutched Kale tightly, whispering prayers in her tongue, her body trembling with fear. John moved quickly. He pulled aside a section of broken flooring near the far wall and pointed to the hidden compartment beneath. "Get in," he ordered. Lyra shook her head. "What about you?" "They can't know you're here," John replied firmly. "If they do, they'll kill us all. I'll distract them." Her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to argue, but Kale stirred in her arms, his small body weak and fragile. She kissed his forehead, then climbed into the hatch, pulling her child close. Before John lowered the cover, Kale whispered faintly, "Papa." The word struck John's chest like a blade. He forced his expression to remain hard, though inside his heart trembled. He sealed the hatch and pulled a rug over it just as a heavy fist slammed against his door. "Open up!" a soldier barked. John took a deep breath, checked his rifle, then unbarred the door. 3 soldiers entered immediately, their weapons raised. The leader stepped inside last, scanning the room with sharp eyes. "We are searching for fugitives. We have orders to search every shelter. Stand aside." John crossed his arms, voice calm but edged with warning. "Look all you want. You'll find nothing but a tired man and a pile of junk." The soldiers spread out, tearing apart crates and throwing his belongings on the ground. One of them tipped over the fire pit, scattering ashes. Another overturned a table, the sound echoing like thunder in the small room. John stood still, his fists clenched, watching them destroy the only home he had left. The leader smirked as he watched John. Strange, a man like you, living alone. No family? No friends? No visitors? John's jaw tightened. Visitors don't last long in this city. The leader's gaze sharpened. Or maybe they last too long. His hand moved to the floorboards near the hidden hatch. He stomped once, the sound hollow. John's stomach clenched. The soldier bent down, ready to pry it open. John stepped forward quickly, slamming his boot down on the board. That's where I keep my tools, he said, his tone cold as ice. Rust and filth. Open it if you want your hands cut by broken steel. The soldier hesitated. His eyes met John's, searching for weakness. But John's stare was unflinching, the kind of look that came from years of war and survival. Slowly, the soldier stepped back. Enough, the leader said finally. This one's too bold to be hiding anyone. Move out. The soldiers filed out, leaving the shelter in ruins. John shut the door, locked it, and leaned against it, his chest heaving with relief. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he dropped to his knees, pulling the rug aside and lifting the hatch. Lyra crawled out, her face pale, her eyes wet with fear. She clutched Cale tightly as she whispered, I thought it was the end. John shook his head. Not yet. Her hands trembled as she reached out and touched his arm. Why do you risk this? You could hand us over and save yourself. Why not? John looked at her, his face carved with shadows from the dim firelight. Because I remember what it was like to be thrown away, and I won't do that to you. Lyra's lips parted, but no words came. She lowered her gaze, her tears falling silently onto Cale's hair. John moved to the corner, picking up what little food had not been ruined. Half of the fruit was smashed, the bread covered in dirt. He salvaged what he could and placed it in Lyra's hands. Make it last. It might be all we have for days. That night, the streets outside grew restless. More patrols marched, dragging prisoners, their cries echoing through the darkness. John sat awake by the window, watching the searchlights sweep across ruined walls. He knew the soldiers would come again, and each visit would bring them closer to discovery. Lyra sat quietly with Cale in her lap, but her eyes stayed on John. The way he sat, silent and ready, gave her a strange sense of safety. She wanted to believe they might survive because of him. Yet she also feared for him, because every risk he took was a chain tightening around his own neck. When Cale finally slept, she spoke softly. You are not like the others. My people feared humans, but you. Her voice broke. You are different. John glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Don't put me on a pedestal. I'm not here to be a savior. I'm just trying to do what's right. Lyra shook her head. That is what makes you different. John turned away, staring into the fire. Deep down, he knew she was wrong. He wasn't noble, not after the blood on his hands from the wars he had fought. But the way Cale looked at him, the way Lyra's voice softened when she spoke to him, made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, he could be something more than the ghost he had become. The night passed heavy and tense. At dawn, smoke rose from the center of the city. John climbed to the roof and saw crowds gathered around a scaffold where prisoners were being chained for execution. He clenched his jaw. He recognized one of the women from the convoy, beaten, but still alive. When he returned inside, Lyra saw the fire in his eyes. What did you see? She asked. Justice, John said bitterly. The council's kind of justice. Her hands tightened around Cale. They'll do the same to us if we're caught. John loaded his rifle and checked his knives. His voice was low, steady. Then we don't get caught. Lyra's eyes widened as she watched him prepare. In that moment, she realized something terrifying and hopeful at the same time. John wasn't only hiding them anymore. He was preparing to fight for them. And maybe fight for something far greater. The smoke from the scaffold lingered in the air all through the day. John sat near the window, his rifle resting across his knees, watching the streets below. The soldiers had tightened their patrols. Every corner of the city now seemed covered by watchful eyes. People moved quickly, their heads down, too afraid to draw attention. The executions had sent a message, and everyone understood it: obedience or death. Inside the shelter, Lyra tried to keep Cale calm. The boy's breathing was still shallow, his thin body weakened from hunger. She sang softly in her language, rocking him in her arms. John listened without speaking. The melody, though foreign, filled the room with a fragile warmth that clashed against the cold fear outside. When the boy finally slept, Lyra looked at John. Her eyes were heavy with worry. "We cannot stay here. They will come again, and sooner or later, they will find us." John nodded. He had thought the same. The walls of his shelter, once a hiding place, now felt like a trap closing in. "Where would you go?" he asked. "There is a safe valley," Lyra whispered. "Far beyond the city walls. My clan once hid there when the soldiers came. It is a long journey, but if we can reach it, Kale will live." John leaned back, rubbing his face with one hand. Leaving the city meant crossing checkpoints, patrols, and open ground. It meant fighting, maybe dying. But staying meant certain capture. He studied Lyra's face, the desperation, the quiet strength. He looked at Kale, sleeping fitfully in her arms. His decision was already made. "Then we go," John said firmly. Lyra's eyes widened, disbelief and relief mixing together. "You would do this? For us?" John's jaw tightened. "For him," he said, nodding at Kale, "and maybe for myself too." That night, he prepared. He checked his rifle, counted his bullets, only a handful left. He strapped a knife to his belt and packed what little food remained. Lyra tied scraps of cloth into a small bundle, careful not to make noise. They moved silently, every step deliberate, until the room looked as though no one had ever lived there. When the city grew quiet, John unbarred the door and peered into the street. The lamps burned low, their red glow painting the walls. Shadows moved, patrols still circling. He motioned for Lyra to follow. She held Kale close against her chest, wrapping him in a cloth to hide his face. Together, they slipped into the darkness. Every step was danger. They kept to alleys, moving from shadow to shadow. Once, the beam of a searchlight swept across the street, forcing them to press against a wall and hold their breath. John's hand rested on his knife, ready to strike if they were discovered. But the light passed, and they moved on. At one corner, they saw a group of prisoners being marched through the street. Their hands were bound, their faces bruised. A soldier shoved one to the ground and laughed. John's teeth clenched. His finger twitched on the rifle's trigger. He wanted to act, but he forced himself to look away. Not yet. His duty was to Lyra and Kale. He couldn't risk them now. They reached the edge of the city near dawn. Ahead stood a checkpoint, 2 armored vehicles and 6 soldiers blocking the gate. The walls loomed tall, spikes lining the top. Freedom lay just beyond. Lyra's breath quickened. "We cannot pass them," she whispered. John's eyes narrowed. "We can, but it won't be quiet." He studied the checkpoint, memorizing the soldiers' movements. 2 stood by the vehicles, their rifles slung lazily. 4 others moved in a slow patrol, circling near the gate. He counted their steps, their pauses, their glances. Years of war had sharpened his mind for this. Finally, he looked at Lyra. "When I move, you run. Don't look back. Head straight for the valley path." Her eyes filled with fear. "No. You will die." John gave her a small, bitter smile. "I've been dead inside for years. If tonight changes that, then it's worth it." Before she could answer, he moved. John stepped into the open, rifle raised. The first shot cracked the silence, dropping a soldier instantly. Chaos erupted. Shouts rang out as the others scrambled for cover. John moved fast, his body low, firing in bursts. One soldier fell, then another. The armored vehicles roared to life, lights flaring. Bullets tore through the air, striking walls and ground. "Run!" John shouted, his voice thundering. Lyra clutched Kale and bolted through the smoke, her feet pounding against the dirt. Behind her, John fought like a man possessed, each shot buying them precious seconds. He ducked behind cover, returned fire, and threw a knife that buried itself in an enemy's throat. The chaos grew, but still he stood, blocking the path to Lyra and her son. A bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Pain seared through him, but he forced himself up, blood running warm down his arm. He roared, charging forward, slamming the butt of his rifle into a soldier's face before pulling the trigger again. Lyra reached the gate, heart hammering, Kale crying softly against her chest. She turned once, tears blurring her vision. Through the smoke, she saw John standing tall, rifle blazing, a wall between her family and death. Her lips trembled. "Please, live," she whispered. John's voice echoed through the night, harsh and unyielding. "Go." And so she ran, clutching Kale tightly, disappearing into the valley path, while behind her the sound of battle raged on. Smoke rose in thick waves behind the city walls as Lyra stumbled down the valley path, clutching Kale close to her chest. Her lungs burned, her legs trembled, but she did not stop running. Every step carried her farther from the screams and gunfire that echoed behind them. Still, her heart ached with each sound, because she knew John was still back there, fighting alone. Cale whimpered softly against her shoulder. She pressed her lips to his hair, whispering, "Hold on, my son. We must trust him. He will come." But inside, her hope wavered. At the checkpoint, John stood among fire and chaos. The ground was littered with shell casings, smoke from burning vehicles swirling around him. His shoulder bled freely, his body bruised, but his rifle still barked with defiance. Each shot echoed like thunder in the valley, warning the soldiers that one human was worth a dozen of them. The soldiers shouted in rage. More poured in from nearby streets, their rifles flashing. John moved like a shadow, diving behind cover, firing, then vanishing into the smoke. He struck with precision, each bullet, each knife, a promise that he would not fall easily. For every soldier that advanced, one more body fell at his feet. But he knew his strength would not last. His chest heaved, his arms grew heavy, and his vision blurred from blood loss. He pressed himself against the wall of a burning transport, his hand clutching the wound in his shoulder. Through the haze, he saw Lyra and Cale far ahead, running down the valley path. Relief washed over him. They were alive. That was enough. Then a voice cut through the smoke. "Human, drop your weapon." John turned slowly, rifle raised. A squad of soldiers stood before him, their weapons trained on his chest. Behind them, an officer stepped forward, his armor marked with high rank. His voice dripped with contempt. "You think one man can defy the council? You're nothing. Just flesh waiting to be crushed." John spat blood onto the ground. "Maybe, but tonight, one man was enough to break your walls." The officer sneered. He raised his hand. "Kill him!" Gunfire exploded. John threw himself aside, firing back even as bullets ripped past him. Pain surged through his side, but he kept moving, refusing to fall. He charged straight at them, a roar tearing from his throat, his bayonet flashing in the firelight. 2 soldiers went down before the others overwhelmed him, striking his body with rifle butts, forcing him to the ground. The officer stepped closer, laughing cruelly. "Pathetic! You could have lived quietly, but you chose this." John lifted his head, blood streaming down his face, and smiled through the pain. "I chose not to be you." The officer's smile faltered for just a moment. Rage twisted his face, and he raised his blade to strike. A sharp whistle pierced the air. The sound came from the cliffs above the valley. Then, like ghosts in the smoke, shadows appeared. Villagers, rebels, people who had hidden in silence for too long. They had heard the battle, seen the fire, and something inside them had finally broken. Rocks and arrows rained down from the cliffs. Crude weapons clashed with steel as dozens of voices cried out in rebellion. The officer turned in shock. His soldiers faltered, torn between holding John down and defending themselves. John seized the moment. With a growl, he shoved a knife into the nearest soldier's chest and ripped the rifle from another's hands. The chaos gave him space, and he crawled to his feet, firing wildly into the squad. The rebels surged forward, overwhelming the soldiers with sheer fury. The officer shouted orders, but his men were losing ground. Fear spread like fire through their ranks. John staggered back, his strength nearly gone. One rebel caught him before he could collapse completely. "Easy, brother. You're safe now." John's vision blurred, but he forced his gaze toward the valley. "Lyra, the child." "They are safe," the rebel answered firmly. "We saw them. They are beyond the checkpoint." Relief flooded John, heavier than the pain. His knees buckled, but the rebels held him upright. Meanwhile, far down the valley, Lyra stopped running when she heard the shouts and battle cries behind her. She turned, clutching Cale tightly, and saw fire lighting the night sky. For a moment, she feared John had fallen. But then she heard something else. Cheers. Human voices, loud and fierce, not of soldiers, but of common people rising at last. Her tears fell freely. She pressed her lips to Cale's forehead and whispered, "He lives." By dawn, the valley was silent again. Smoke drifted above the city walls, but the checkpoint no longer stood. The council's flag had been torn down, and the bodies of their soldiers lay scattered. The rebels had carried John away, tending his wounds with rough but careful hands. When Lyra found him later, he lay bandaged on a cot, pale but breathing. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she touched his arm. "You kept your promise," she whispered, tears spilling. John's eyes opened slowly. He looked at her, then at Cale, who clung to her side. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a faint, tired smile, he whispered back, He called me Papa, didn't he? Lyra nodded, her lips trembling. Yes, and now you are. John closed his eyes again, exhaustion pulling him under. But for the first time in years, he felt peace. He had chosen mercy, and in doing so, he had found something worth living for.